All right, who started it? Who started it? Well, he did. No, she did. No, he did. He started it when he said Billy's dad's a jerk. No, I didn't say that. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. Did so. Did not. Did so. Have you heard or been involved in such disputes? The beginnings of things are not always clear. How things started or start is often in dispute. That happens these days, especially with social media and things that go viral. And where did that come from? How did that get started? Well, according to John, it all started with a word, with a sound, the breath of infinity moving across the vocal cords of eternal creativity. It all began there. Or if you prefer, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and all things came into being through that originating and original Word. That's part of the prologue of the Gospel of John. And some scholars think that maybe that was an early church hymn that John sort of brought in, a poem, a sort of soaring poem that was set to music that people would sing, that would sort of create its own reality as it was sung, as it was spoken, as it was offered up. And the claim of it is that what was happening in the person Jesus was God, the infinite entering fully into the finite, the eternal moving into the neighborhood. So, how do we know that? Where does that come from? Where did that get started? Who started that? Well, John tells us there was this guy named John. John, the gospel writer, tells us about another guy named John who was baptizing people in the Jordan River. And so we call him John the Jordan River guy. We could, but we don't. We call him John the Baptist, John the Baptizer. He had this deep sense of what God was about during his time, and so he called it out. He announced it to the chagrin of the officials of the time. You see, the people that came to talk to him are sort of the Mitch McConnells and the Chuck Schumers and the Nancy Pelosi's and the Lindsey Grahams, the Jeff Bezos and the Mark Zuckerbergs of that time, with a little religion sprinkled in there. Not too much, but a little. And they are fully invested in this empire, in this world, in this thing, this system, this time. And it's for them. It's about them. It's mine. It's about us. It's ours. And we really don't care about you too much. We want ours. And so when I name names of contemporaries, I'm not saying they're evil people. I'm saying the same thing happens over and over again. And to be clear, as invested as they are in their time, their system, this empire, you and I are invested in it as well. We just don't have as much to lose as they do. But we are committed to this. We are dug into this. We are participants in this. Anyway, the Senate Judiciary Committee or the Homeland Security Committee or some committee calls John to come and testify. And John is all over that because he's all about testifying and giving his witness. And so the hearing begins. Mr. Baptist, that's your last name, Mr. Baptist. We want to be clear on your identity here so that we can establish that and that what your true purpose is. So we have some questions for you. So the first question is, are you the Messiah? Are you the Christ, the one that God is sending, the one we've been waiting for? And John says no. I see. Well, are you then Elijah? Elijah was the one, the prophet who didn't die according to the story, but actually was taken up by a chariot into heaven for safekeeping until he would return to usher in the coming day of God. So when Elijah appears, then we know that the day of God has arrived. Are you Elijah? No, I'm not. Well, are you the prophet then? The prophet was one who was spoken of by Moses or after Moses to become like Moses, a leader who was that connected to God, who would have that sort of authority, that sort of clarity, that sort of gravity with people. Are you the prophet? And John says, no, I'm not. And they said, well, if you're not the Messiah, not Elijah, not the prophet, well then who are you? Well, hold the thought. What's going on here with the questions? What often is going on with such questions? Doesn't it seem like what the questioners are trying to do is to put John somehow into a box, into a category of expectations where, okay, if you're this, then we know what you're going to do. We know where you come from. We know what you're about. And so we can stick you in that pigeonhole and we're all good and everything is fine. But to every question that they ask him, John says, no, I'm not that. I don't fit there. I don't fit there. I don't belong there. I'm not that. What's going on here is not those things. Well, who are you then? I am simply the voice of one crying in the wilderness. Make the way of God open and clear and straight and available and accessible. I am the one, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. Make God's path clear. Now think about that. Given what you know, may have stored away about scriptural stories about voices in places of wilderness, in places of unsettledness, in places of chaos, of maybe beginning creativity. A voice in that place offering a word across that openness, that space. What does that make you think of? There's a couple things I want to point out or note in this text about John. One is in the verse 6. If it was translated literally, it would go something like, a man sent from God happened. His name being John. A man sent from God happened. His name was John. The Greek word is egeneto. And in that you get the G-E-N like Genesis, that this man happens, originates, is generated by God and sent into this time. As compared to those who come to question him, where do they come from and who sends them? They come from headquarters, right? They come from Jerusalem. They come from the temple. They come from the establishment. Their credentials are very different, and their purpose is very different. And John wants us to know that. The gospel writer wants us to know that. The second thing is, John the Baptist speaks to these authorities about one who stands among you now whom you do not know. Well, who is that? Well, it turns out to be Jesus. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus is God with us, God incarnate, God in flesh and blood, the eternal in the local, the infinite in the midst of the finite. And John pointing out to the religious authorities who should be all over this, that they don't have a clue about this, is telling as well. So the gospel writer works very hard to get John the Baptist into the story and then to get him out of the story. John comes to witness to the light, the gospel says, but he is not the light. Okay, we're clear on that. He comes to witness to the light, but he is not the light. There's politics behind that. There are followers of Jesus, and there are followers of John who are still around at the time that John writes his gospel. And so there's that going on behind that. So we want to be clear. And yet, he is the voice crying in the wilderness. He originates in God to call out, to name, to point to the clarifying coming Word in Jesus. He echoes the original voice speaking into the void. From way back, the one that says, "Let there be light." No wonder he's so central to the story. So the question that has been bubbling in me this week is the gospel writer being really honest with us? Is he being truthful about who John really is? He's not the light, he just testifies, he just points it out. Really? Can you see something and name it and be clear about it and where it is without somehow being a participant in it, without something of that being inside of you? I was reminded this week of the words of a song by Leonard Cohen. It showed up on Facebook. "Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything." That's how the light gets in. And it's how the light gets out. On the 19th of April in 1943, an 11-year-old boy named Simon Gronowski is on a train in a cattle car with a whole bunch of people packed into that cattle car, his mother and sister included. They're Jews from Mechelen, Belgium, and they are being shipped to Auschwitz. They're going to die. As the train leaves Mechelen, some members of the resistance converge upon it and try to stop the train, and they succeed at least in slowing it down enough so that some of those who have been loaded onto it are able to escape. Some of the Jews who are being taken to die get away. And as the train then begins to accelerate, again, Simon's mother urges him to jump, squeeze between the slats and jump off the train before it gets going too fast. And so he does. This 11-year-old boy jumps from this moving train, expecting his mom and sister to follow, but they don't. They stay on the train. And they die in Auschwitz. And Simon said later, "If I had known that my mother was not going to jump, I would have stayed on the train." For the next year and a half, well, this is 1943 in the spring. For the next year and a half, he is hidden by several different Catholic families in the countryside of Belgium, hidden from the Nazis. When Brussels is liberated in September of 1944, he is able to go out and search and find his father, who's still alive, who's been in and out of the hospital during this time. His father lives for a year, and then he also dies. So at the end of World War II, here is this 13-year-old boy who has lost his entire family to the Holocaust and the effects of the Nazis. He's alone in the world. What would that be like? He survives. And as a teenager, he teaches himself how to play the piano. His sister Ita, who was 19 when she died, he just adored her, and she was, he said, an excellent pianist. And so this picking this up and being able to play the music that she played was for him a way to sort of stay connected with her, maybe even to communicate with her. Well, he keeps this story of his experience to himself for almost 60 years. Not because it's a secret, but because he feels guilty. So why are they all dead and I am still alive? Why did I survive instead of them? It doesn't seem right. Well, some of his friends in 2002 encouraged him, urged him, pushed him to share his story, to write it down. He's a lawyer now. To write his story out and then to share it with those who want to hear it. And so there were places that would invite him to come and speak, and he would talk about his experience, what he remembered. It became his witness, his testimony, talking about what had happened and what did happen, what does happen and what can happen, what can be the darkness and the light, the good and the bad in the world, and how we are part of that. He came to bear witness to the light, but he's not the light. Or is he? Maybe he is. In March, when the pandemic began, the coronavirus hit, and it hit hard in European countries. It hit Belgium hard, and so they went into a lockdown. And suddenly, Simon Gronowski, who's now 89 years old, is thrown back into that experience of confinement, of living in fear of this thing that is trying to kill you, trying to find you and kill you. And he remembers the sadness and the pain of that time and of the 1940s. It all kind of comes back on him, and he hunkers down and pulls in and locks things up tight and stays inside by himself. And then in April, something moves in him. And so he moves his electronic piano over by the window, under the windowsill. And he throws open the windows that have been locked, opening them wide to the sort of the terrified silence of this city that lives in fear of this killer. And he begins to play a jazz tune on his piano. And within just moments, heads pop out of windows up and down the street, neighbors leaning out to listen because they haven't heard anything for so long, anything like this. And some of them put their masks on and come out of their homes, and they gather around his window to listen to him play. The impromptu concert of that day becomes a repeated event. He continues to play. And he said originally it was just so that people could feel some happiness, so he could share some joy with them in this heavy, dark time. Music, he says, is a means of connection, a means of communication, a witness, a word, some light in the world. Who are you? The officials from Jerusalem asked John. Are you the Messiah? Are you Elijah? Are you the prophet? He said, no. I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make God's path straight, open the way, clear it so that it is obvious and accessible to all and for all. I'm the voice of one speaking into the void, let there be light. Let there be hope, let there be joy, let there be peace, let there be love, let there be music. That's the voice of God. That's the voice of Jesus. It's the voice of John the Baptist. It's the voice of Simon Gronowski. And it is potentially your voice as well. Now, isn't this a perfectly wonderful, dark time for your voice to be heard anew, for your witness to be seen, for your light to shine, for you to happen anew in Christ? Amen.